Our next speaker, she's associate professor at product design department of Parsons New School of Design, and she's also principal of Rab Labs. Please welcome Anna Rabinowitz.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about recombinations and reconfigurations, ways in which science and design are increasingly intermingling. So to kick the subject off, I'd like to turn to one of literature's most famous arachnids. Do you understand how there could be any writing in a spider's web? Oh no, said Dr. Dorian, I don't understand it. But for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place. When the words appeared, everyone said they were a miracle. But no one pointed out that the web itself is a miracle. In nature, creatures are specialized to do certain wondrous things. In general, this is based upon simply their need to survive. But to humans, these unexplained powers of nature seem like phenomena. And in fact, the more unexplained they are, the more they do seem like very strange and interesting phenomena. And the potential is that they can lead to very magical design solutions in the hands of designers. So science and design, as I mentioned, is increasingly converging. And for example, there's a movement called synthetic biology, which pairs chemists and biologists with designers in these very interesting residencies that go on for months and months. And they lock scientists and designers together in rooms, and they see what they come up with. And what I think is really interesting about this is it suggests the potential for a very new kind of design process, one that merges traditional linear scientific process, which is hypothesis-driven and all about proving and testing hypotheses in very controlled environments, with design exploration, which is intentionally very iterative. And I think the future is going to show what this new kind of design process can look like. In this context, product designers are in a very interesting position because potentially they're in the role of conjoining these seemingly very different disciplines like biology, chemistry, and bioengineering. So in this field of bio-inspired design, there have been traditionally two kinds of design approaches. The first is that researchers are inspired by a natural phenomena like burrs, and then they develop a human application for it, like Velcro, and this is a very classic example. But the second kind of design approach is one in which designers begin with a problem, and it's usually a human problem, a human need, and then research ways in which nature is already addressing those challenges. And it could be one organism in nature, it could be many organisms in nature, to ultimately apply them to a design solution. And here's an example that David so aptly brought up earlier, which is ultra-fast swimsuits that have been developed by Speedo. Sorry, let's postpone this if we can. Based upon the morphology of shark skin. So you can see in this image here, this is a close-up view of the scales of the shark. It's a microscopic view, and on those scales are tiny rivulets, so they're tiny channels in the scales which direct water in a nonlinear fashion. And it turns out water is actually much more efficient when it flows in a nonlinear fashion, so Speedo found out about this. And they used this microscopic structure to develop an extremely fast swimsuit. And according to one of the Olympic athletes who wore this suit, when he was swimming, it was so fast that he felt like he was swimming downhill. My gosh, can you imagine? And the Olympic Committee actually could imagine, so they banned this swimsuit because it was just too fast. So the ultimate goals of these kinds of explorations are products that are more energy efficient, that use less material, that are less toxic, that are better adapted to sustaining life on Earth, and that are essentially transformative. And you can see this kind of visual transformation between hydrated plant cells and desiccated plant cells. And it's very visual, but in a sense, this kind of transformation is metaphoric. It's the kind of transformation that can occur when these sorts of design principles are applied to real design problems, learning from nature. So crystal ceramic is a project from my own practice. It's based on the molecular and macroscopic structure of h-quartz, which is a certain type of quartz. And in this project, I've been examining what would happen if crystal actually grew up the side of a recognizable substrate. In this case, the substrate is a bowl. It could be any other sort of substrate or any other sort of material. And the prototype is in the process of being fabricated using 3D ceramic printing technology. I'm working with a research lab at Bowling Green State University who has this proprietary formula. They've gutted the inside of a Z-Corp machine and are running through the ceramic to print this beautiful new piece. which I think will be very interesting, because then in essence the prototype grows much in the way that crystal itself grows. So the categorization that I'd like to talk about today, I've chosen to break this down into 4 different categories. The first is cruise control, so locomotion is inspiration. The second is extreme resilience, so adaptability is inspiration. The third is going with the flow, system energy as inspiration. And the fourth is collective behavior, so looking to community, animal communities as inspiration. So in general, in this area, energy-efficient animals like the cheetah, the world's fastest land animal, inspire prosthetic development. Like these sort of prosthetics. I'm sure many of you have seen these. They're really brilliant. They are legs, prosthetic legs based upon the biomechanics and running behaviors of the cheetah. They store energy, they're easy to power, they're beautifully worn by double amputee and former Paralympian Amy Mullins, who is also an amazing spokesperson for the disabled. And ultimately, they mechanically work, but what I'm interested more in is their implication, their societal implication, which is they empower and enable the disabled. So kangaroos are a certain animal that I'm very interested in, and this is actually, I'll be presenting some of my ancient thesis research, which is all about kangaroo energy efficiency. So it turns out that kangaroos can cruise for hours and hours at the same speed. And as they hop faster, their oxygen consumption actually levels off. Now, why do we know this? Because back in 1973, there were 2 mad British scientists called Taylor and Dawson. And in their lab in England, they actually hopped these giant kangaroos on treadmills, and they measured their oxygen consumption by putting VO2 masks on them. Now, what they found was really extraordinary. They found that as these animals hopped faster and faster, their oxygen consumption leveled off. So they were amazingly energy efficient animals. And scientists over the years have tried in many ways to explain this phenomenon. There have been some solutions, but people are always searching for more beyond kind of a simple spring mass system solution. So in my thesis research, I worked with scientists and zoologists at the University of Adelaide in Australia, and we too hopped kangaroos on treadmills. In this case, they're wallabies, which is the tiniest species of kangaroos. And what we did is we put tiny removable markers on their limbs and tracked the position of their hind limbs using high-speed motion capture. And coming back to Stanford, I worked with a team of biomechanicists to actually mechanically model what was going on with the kangaroo. And what we found out was that as the kangaroo speeds up, it does not hop any higher. Now, this is antithetical to the way that humans run. In fact, when we run, we translate our center of mass sort of up and down and up and down. And that's why we become so tired when we run, or at least I become so tired when I run. But kangaroos don't become tired because their center of mass is very static. It continues on at a very horizontal plane, so they're extremely energy efficient. Turns out we would be more energy efficient too if we had tails, because for a kangaroo, their tails provide counterbalance, which help balance their whole bodies out. So another example in this area is the ultra cane. It's a cane for visually impaired, and it's based on the way that bats find their way in darkness. Now, bats do this using bat echolocation, which is essentially bats, just like this cane, send out sound waves. So this cane sends out sound waves which bounce against whatever obstruction is in the way of the visually impaired person, and that sound wave then bounces back, and the handle vibrates, providing feedback that indicates that there's something in the way. So this is sort of a very beautiful project, which is a direct connection between biological inspiration and actually something that can be applied very directly to human need. So the second category is looking at animal adaptability and resilience. In this category, much of the tangible output is in the area of robotics. And these are robots that, based on the mechanics of animals, that can traverse and adapt to uneven terrain. They have excellent stability and adaptability. But what I would argue is the real ingenuity in this area is the fact that researchers and designers and engineers and scientists are looking at multiple organisms for inspiration. So they're looking at multiple things in nature that are interesting, and then they're using their minds to put them together in unusual and novel ways to create products and ideas that are entirely new. So Robert Full is one of the pioneers in this field. He's a brilliant entomologist at University of California in Berkeley. And he says, I think, like most people, that bugs are actually disgusting, but they are simply extraordinary at telling us the secrets of nature. It pains me to see things become extinct because that's a wonderful set of design ideas that are gone. In fact, every organism has a story to tell. And the Ariel crab robot is an output in Professor Full's lab, and it combines biomechanical features of multiple organisms, like a lizard or a crab or even a cockroach. And what these three organisms share is a very interesting way that, that they move, and that their legs move in relationship to their body. Each leg sort of turns clockwise around its central axis. Really fascinating, different organisms like this. And then you can see this crab robot in motion. This, in fact, is just the crab. The robot's not here yet. But they're amphibious, so these robots can climb over obstructions. And if waves flip them, they actually reorient. So the top becomes the bottom, and this is because of the way their legs move. It doesn't matter whether they're on the top or whether they're on the bottom. So it's really an extraordinary thing. So another example is a wall climbing robot based upon the properties of the gecko. So the gecko, like this robot, can easily climb the walls and even the ceilings of a room or a space outside. And it's because they have these tiny adhesive foot hairs called setae. It doesn't have to do with glue, it just has to do with these microscopic forces called van der Waals forces that hold their tiny little setae to whatever surface they touch. So this robot developed at Stanford University is the Sticky Bot, and it works exactly in this fashion. And what I love about this particular robot it is so anthropomorphic. It looks so real and so alive. And when it moves its little feet, it really can convince you of many things. Just as long as the wall is dry and not wet, it works in that fashion. So actually, I find it hypnotic. I could watch it for hours. See, look, it flaps its little fingers. Okay. So the third category, system energy, is inspiration. This category is all about animals that are at the whim of larger natural systems like the ocean or the air. And these animals have developed ways to exploit these natural systems, again, in order to survive. They don't do it to be interesting, they do it to stay alive. In general, the output in this area, the tangible output, are devices that derive energy from the input of the sea. But in this case, I'd like to talk about something else that I've been working on, which is the study of the sea fan, which is a sea organism, a very fascinating sea organism, which is extremely materially economical. Its veins, you can see these larger areas, provide the structure, and its mesh is actually very thin. It is a filter feeder, so water flows through it, and it retains on its mesh the nutrients that it needs. It's really quite a beautiful thing. So I developed swim fins that were based on these sorts of principles, which are also very materially economical. Again, the veins provide the structure, the mesh is very thin, and the water flows through these swim fins, allowing what is necessary to remain, which is enough surface area to give you propulsion in the water so you can get a good kick. So you're able to swim in the water quite well. They don't allow you to go extremely fast, but they do allow you to have a feeling that you're sort of at one with the ocean. Or another piece that I developed, which is a colander based on these same sort of principles. And it's cast out of a single piece of stainless steel, and it's in production right now. And the idea is that the water flows through this colander just as the water flows through the mesh of the sea fan. And in this colander, it retains the nutrients that you need. In the case of the sea fan, could be its food. In the case of us, could be something as plebeian as spaghetti. So the last category is collective behavior, which Philip and I were talking about yesterday, which is community as inspiration, animal community as inspiration. So this is all about studying group behavior in animal communities like ant communities or bee communities that leads to design of human systems. And often the output are algorithms that determine these kinds of systems. So the focus is on animal systems that have individual control, but collective creation. For example, bees that each of them are individually doing a certain task, but they're collectively building something larger. And swarm intelligence is something that fits into this area. So an example is a telecommunication system based on the behavior of colony building ants. And you can see this little video down here. This is some excellent research done at Georgia Tech, in which they're mapping the way that, they're tracking and mapping the way that ants are interacting, and they're categorizing their interactions. And then with these sort of categorizations, then develop algorithms that can do these kinds of things. So let's talk a little bit about moral implications, because I do think it's important that at least we're reflective about this kind of practice. And specifically in relation to prosthetic limbs and robots. Some of them some of these prosthetic limbs and robots based on animal locomotion are indeed designed to enhance human function beyond natural abilities. So it raises ethical issues. Researchers, and I guess researchers in that category, I'd include designers and scientists and engineers, are charged with supercharging humans. Is that okay? Are we allowed to do that? Or are we simply making conscious choices to empower people through enhancement? I know my point of view on that. Perhaps we can debate it all later. So the $6 million man is an excellent example of this kind of convergence of science and design. If you look through the eye of this Steve Austin doll, you will see it is truly bionic. If you strip away the skin of his forearm, you will find circuitry. He is ultimately an excellent representation of the way that we could be if we were completely conjoined as science and design ourselves. So continuing with these moral implications, going beyond what is humanly possible, another example is Oscar Pistorius. He was a double amputee, was banned from the Beijing Olympics because his prosthetic limbs apparently gave him an unfair advantage. The Olympic Committee felt that he was, I think, 5 or 6 inches taller than he would have been had his legs developed normally. So the implications are really interesting. Does design have the power to enhance people to such an ability that it becomes scary, that it becomes the sort of thing that threatens folks like the Olympic Committee? I suspect that they were afraid that he could possibly beat an able-bodied runner. And what are the implications of something like that? So in conclusion, facilitating these kinds of cross-pollinations between the sciences and design, I believe, is a fresh means of approaching design and finding inspiration at its very earliest stages. And I also believe that product designers and designers in general are uniquely situated to be sort of at the hub, at the center of this kind of dialogue, in order to collect and synthesize information from all of these disparate disciplines. And as this field continues to advance, it's up to designers to decide whether science fiction, the good or bad parts of it, are becoming real, or are we simply making a conscious choice to use design for good? And I think it's in our hands. So thank you to all of the contributions to this presentation, and thank you very much.
Because I think it's pretty interesting when you talk about innovation and design they are family, I think. They should be joined together. But sometimes I do see that the engineers and the innovators, they maybe are too far away from design. How should you change that?
Too far away from design in biologically inspired areas. I think if we can come back to focusing on the human need, then I think it grounds all these kinds of explorations, because then they move forward from being either gratuitous explorations of fascinating biological phenomena, and they move into a realm in which we can develop things that are actually usable, interesting, relevant, important, sustainable, in all those ways. So it's grounded in human need, and it's grounded in a consciousness about what we're creating and whether it's responsible.
So in the schools, in the design school at Parsons, do you invite the engineers or the inventors into the school? And
we do as much as possible. There's a collaboration I've been trying to get going with Cooper Union, with engineers over there, to bring them into the classroom to talk about these kinds of things and to work on a project together. And I think in general, the more kind of multidisciplinary collaborations that we can do, either leveraging the resources of our own schools or bringing in departments that don't exist from other schools is absolutely essential, because only in bringing those kinds of folks together, especially in academic settings, can we come up with really novel things, because it's starting to happen in industry. So it seems that in schools it should be happening more and more, especially bringing in biologists and scientists into design classrooms.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Thank you very much. We have one question.
When can we get the colander?
The colander will be in MoMA stores in the fall.
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay,
so keep your
that's
fingers
a quick
crossed.
question.
Sorry?
Not in Cooper-Hewitt.
Not in the Cooper-Hewitt. Oh!
Okay, thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you very
Just
much.
give her a round of applause.